converge in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood and looked down as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for the passing there, had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that made all the difference. We have choices to make in our lives. We make decisions every day. Some of those decisions have extraordinary import and tremendous implications for the future, and some have no impact at all. The problem is we don't always know which is which. We hear words that come out of our mouths, and we immediately realize that those are the exact same words that our parents said. And sometimes we can't even believe we just said them. Just this past week, a cousin of mine who was actually married by my parents called me and said that they had tuned into our Shabbat live stream. I suppose my mother is sharing that link with everybody she knows. And my cousin, Dr. Rudnicki, pointed out that I sound exactly like my father, that I have the same gestures and tone and timbre. And I have to tell you, I was honored. It actually brought a bit of a tear to my eye as I imagined following in my father's footsteps, which is why I can't understand when I say to Sharon, you sound just like your mother, she's not equally impressed. You know, I'm just kidding. But seriously, we can't help but sometimes follow the script of our parents. It seems as though it's already programmed into our DNA. When placed in the same exact circumstance as our parents, we often do exactly what they did. In this week's Parsha, we have the exact same thing. It happens twice. There's a famine in the land, and God says to Isaac, don't go down to the land of Egypt. It's a foreshadowing of the fact that Isaac can't help himself but to relive exactly the way his father had lived, even though we know there was so much distance between them. And God reminds Isaac, you're not the same person as your father. Don't go down to the land of Egypt. And when Isaac encounters Avimelech as Abraham had in the past, he turns to Rivka, his beloved wife, and he says, make believe you're my sister, so no harm will come upon us. And in fact, Isaac does exactly as his father had done. He asks his wife to make believe she's his sister so that no harm would come to them. And the exact same circumstance unfolds, and Avimelech comes to Isaac and he says to him, why were you not honest with us? The same way the Pharaoh had done with Abraham. They wanted no harm of Abraham and Isaac, but Isaac and Abraham assumed the worst about other people. There was a paranoia in their genes. Even though God had warned Isaac, you can do something different than your father, he's unable to. And so the same event unfolds the exact same way. Isaac makes the same mistake as his father. It was a move that we expected from Abraham because of the tense relationship between Abraham and Sarah. But it wasn't a move we expected of Isaac, who loved Rebekah deeply. The moment they met, their eyes connected, and they had a deeper connection than we ever saw from Abraham and Sarah. Yet Isaac does the exact same thing. It's as if he couldn't help it. Adam Stone, in one of my favorite Facebook pages, groups, called Jewish Humor, wrote this past Tuesday, "Today I brought home a bunch of apples, and without a thought, I asked my wife if we have a shissel large enough for those apples. I didn't even know I knew the word," he wrote. Shissel. Never in my life have I used that word. I certainly haven't heard it in over 30 years since the passing of my grandparents. So here's the question, he writes. Where did that word come from? And within minutes, Claire Rice-Wasser, I don't know who any of these people are, you should know, responded, "It's in your DNA." And while it's a funny exchange that speaks to the instincts of saying and doing what our parents did and how it gets programmed into us, there can be significant damage to those whom we love and to ourselves when we repeat the same exact patterns of our parents. But it's the most significant moment in the Parsha and the Midrash that understands it that I want to point to this morning. You know the very famous story of Isaac and Jacob and the birthright and its transfer. You know very well the story of Jacob getting that birthright from his brother, making him say the words, "Okay, I'll sell it to you." As if a moment in his life Jacob could overpower his bigger, heftier brother. And we see that over and over again. And there's this moment in the Parsha, it says, "Vayashav Yitzchak, vayachpor et be'erot hamayim asher chafaru b'yimei Avraham Avinu," that Isaac imitates his father, and he says, and he digs the wells that were dug in the days of his father. The metaphor is not lost on us, that we dig up old stuff all the time. And we imagine the moment of Jacob and Esau, the conflicts they had, and the way Jacob is going to stick it to him in this morning's Parsha by forcing him to sell him the birthright. And we see something amazing. I would remind you that it says explicitly in this morning's Parsha that Jacob was Rebekah's favorite and that Esau was Yitzchak's favorite. I know parents aren't supposed to choose their favorite, but it says it so clearly in this morning's Parsha that Isaac loved Esau, that Rebekah loved Jacob. And we can see how much Isaac wants to give the birthright to his eldest son. And we remind you over and over again that the Torah rejects primogeniture, that the oldest almost never succeeds over the youngest. We see it with Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac becomes the father of our great nation. We see it with Jacob and Esau. Jacob becomes the father of our great nation. And then there's this incredible moment in which Jacob draws close to his father Isaac at the very end of the story. And Isaac says the most powerful words of that moment, "Hakol kol Yaakov v'adayim yedei Esav," that these are the voice, or this is the voice of Jacob, but you feel like Esau. You have the hands of Esau. And then the Midrash says something incredibly powerful. The Midrash understands that Isaac knows exactly what's going on. He's not saying, "I think it's Esau, but it could be Jacob. I don't really know. I guess it's Isaac's mistake." But Isaac really knows. Isaac knows it's Jacob. And he understands that maybe he has to give him the birthright because Jacob is an Ish Tam Yoshevo Alim. He's a simple guy. He's never going to make it out in the world. He likes to stay home. And so maybe he thinks to himself, I should give Jacob the blessing because Esau will always be able to stand on his own 2 feet. And the Midrash says the following on this verse of Akol Kol Yaakov Yadayim Yedei Esav, that this is the voice of Jacob but the hands of Esav. Ve'al charbecha techyeh, ve'haumot kulam b'cherv chayehem, ve'ata tachlif emunatecha, ve'tavo alehem b'shalahem. The Midrash says, in the words, the Midrash puts into the mouth of Isaac the words, all the nations live by the sword. You're trading your craft and coming against them with their craft. Let me tell you what that means. Isaac is saying to Jacob, you don't have to be Esav to succeed in the world. All you got to do is be Jacob. You don't have to turn into Esav in order to be successful. All you got to do is be Jacob. Don't trade who you are for someone who you are not. Don't strive to be like Esav. Don't use your hands like Esav. Rather, listen to your inner voice. Hakol Kol Yaakov. The inner voice of Jacob has something to offer the world that's different than the hands of Esav. The Midrash reads this beautiful lesson into an exchange between Jacob and Isaac. The Midrash knows Isaac knows who he is, but he wants to offer Jacob the moment of empowerment. He says, you know who you are. I don't need to tell you who you are. Isaac is saying to Jacob, you don't have to go down this path of scheming and lying and cheating. You can remain true to who you are. Don't imitate your brother. Take the road less traveled, he says. Look, I'm not a big fan of Jim Carrey, and nor do I think he is one of the great philosophers of our generation, but he was offered the opportunity to give the commencement address at a university, and he said the following: fear is going to play a role in your life, but you get to decide how much. You can spend your whole life imagining ghosts, worrying about your pathway to the future, but all there ever will be is what's happening here and the decisions that you make in this moment, which are based either on love or on fear. So many of us choose our path out of fear disguised as practicality. Then he went on to tell the following story about his father, which I find to be incredible. Jim Carrey said, my father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe it was possible for him. And so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a safe job as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job. And our family had to do whatever we could do to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, he went on to say, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want. So, you might as well take a chance on doing what you do love. These are fearful times right now, I tell you. Faced with a deadly pandemic, we're offered the opportunity to see our mortality and ask ourselves the question, is the path I'm going to take going in the direction I want to go, or should I make a change? Two roads diverged in a wood. And I took the road less traveled by. And that's made all the difference. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page 184, Chatzi Kaddish. Please rise.
Yitgadal, Yitgadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.